when a German Shepherd puppy locked eyes with the man kneeling outside his kennel. He began to cry so loudly the entire shelter fell silent. Everyone thought it was a moment of joyful reunion until the man whispered the truth that broke every heart in the room and left them in tears. The shelter was always busiest on Saturdays. Families came in with hopeful eyes, children tugging at their parents' hands, volunteers shuffling from kennel to kennel. Rows of barking dogs filled the air with a kind of desperate chorus, some pleading to be chosen, others simply trying to be heard. But in the very last row, behind a chain-link gate, one puppy never joined in the noise. He was a small German Shepherd no more than 6 months old, with oversized paws and ears that never seemed to stand quite straight. His name on the chart read, though no one was sure if that was the name he'd always known. Buddy didn't bark. He didn't jump or spin in circles when people walked by. He only watched the door day after day with a solemn patience that made the volunteers ache. He would lift his head at every creak of the hinges, his eyes searching each stranger's face, then lower it again. When they kept walking, "He's waiting for someone," Marcy, the kennel manager, whispered to a coworker one morning. "You can see it in his eyes." No one knew exactly how he had ended up here. Animal control had found him wandering near an abandoned house on the edge of town, ribs visible under his dusty fur. He hadn't growled or snapped when they picked him up, just looked at them with that same quiet sadness. Some dogs came in terrified, others angry, but Buddy was simply empty, as if the part of him that should have been playful had been left behind with whoever he'd lost. And no matter how many visitors passed his kennel, he never stopped waiting for the one face he hoped would return. The morning started like any other, with the volunteers unlocking kennels and preparing bowls of food. Buddy barely lifted his head when the other dogs erupted in excited barking. But everything changed when the front door opened with a soft chime and an older man stepped inside, clutching something in his hand. His name was David. His hair was gray at the temples, and the lines around his eyes spoke of too many long nights and heavy decisions. In his palm, he held a frayed blue collar. The tag was scratched nearly blank, but the shape of it was unmistakable. A little bone engraved with a single name. Marcy approached him gently. "Can I help you, sir?" David nodded but didn't speak. Right away, he swallowed, his gaze dropping to the collar. I'm looking for a German Shepherd puppy," he managed. "Finally. He went missing a month ago. His name is Max." Marcy felt her heart catch. "We did take in a Shepherd puppy recently," she said cautiously. "Come with me." She led him past rows of kennels, dogs pressing against the fencing as they passed. David didn't look at any of them. His hands stayed tight around the collar, his steps slow and uncertain. When they turned the final corner, Marcy stopped in front of Buddy's kennel. The puppy lifted his head. For a second, he seemed unsure. Then his ears twitched and his dark eyes widened. David stared back, his breath caught in his chest. "Max," he whispered. In that instant, the puppy let out a high, broken cry that silenced every other sound in the shelter. He scrambled to the gate, pressing his nose so hard against the wire it left marks on his muzzle. David fell to his knees. So quickly, Marcy reached out, instinctively, afraid he would collapse. But he didn't seem to notice her. His eyes were locked on the puppy, on Max, who was now pawing frantically at the chain-link barrier, crying in desperate, gasping whimpers. "Oh, Max." David choked, pressing his forehead against the cold metal. "I'm so sorry, boy." The puppy's tail wagged so hard it thumped the concrete behind him. He pushed his nose through the smallest gap in the fence and licked David's trembling fingers. Tears streamed down David's face, and he didn't bother to hide them. Volunteers stepped closer, some covering their mouths to keep from crying themselves. They'd seen reunions before, but never anything this raw, this heartbreakingly pure. "He remembers you," Marcy whispered, her own voice cracking. David nodded, unable to speak. He slipped the collar through the fence, and Max nudged it with his nose as if he knew exactly what it was. For a few perfect seconds it felt like nothing in the world existed except an old man and the puppy who had never stopped waiting for him. But then reality pressed in. David's shoulders slumped under the weight of it. He drew in a shaky breath and pulled his hand back, wiping his face. "I came to say goodbye," he said so quietly that Marcy barely heard him. "I lost my house last month. I thought he'd be better off here until I could figure things out, but I can't take him back." Max wed again, softer now, and laid his paw against the fence like he was begging David not to leave. Marcy felt her throat close as she knelt beside David. His hands were still pressed against the fence, his fingers brushing Max's soft fur. The puppy had stopped crying, but his eyes never left the man who was everything he remembered of home. "I come here every week," David confessed, voice. "I park across the street just to see if he's still here, to make sure he's okay." "Why today?" Marcy asked gently. He swallowed hard. "They're asking me to sign the final surrender to give up any claim to him. It means he'll be eligible for adoption right away." Marcy hesitated. "And you can't." "I have nowhere to go," he whispered, shame bright in his eyes. "I'm staying in a friend's garage. I thought I'd find work, get a place, but every day it gets harder, and he deserves better than this." Max pressed his nose against David's palm, whining low in his throat as if he understood every word. David's shoulders shook. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted this." Behind them, another volunteer started to cry. A couple who'd come to look at dogs stood frozen in the aisle, hands clasped over their hearts. "He's waited for you every single day," Marcy said softly. "He never gave up on you." David drew in a ragged breath and finally pulled his hand away. Max let out a keening sound that echoed down the corridor. "I don't have a choice," he whispered. "Please just find someone who will love him." And in that moment it felt like the saddest thing in the world was not cruelty, but love. That wasn't enough to change their circumstances. The room felt impossibly heavy as David rose to his feet. Max's tail thumped once, hopeful. But when the man didn't reach for the latch, the puppy lowered his head in confusion. His ears flattened, and he pressed his body against the gate as if he could somehow pass through it to be held. Marcy stood slowly, her heart pounding with a decision she hadn't known she would make until this moment. She touched David's arm. "Wait," she said quietly. "Maybe it doesn't have to end like this." He looked at her with tired eyes. "What do you mean?" She took a breath, steadying her voice. "We have a community fund. It's meant for emergency vet bills and special cases, but I think this is a special case." She turned to the other. Volunteers. If we put his story online, if people knew, maybe we could raise enough to help you get back on your feet. Enough for a deposit, for food, for whatever you need to bring him home. David stared at her, disbelief flickering into hope. You do that? Marcy nodded. You belong together. Anyone can see that. That night, the shelter posted a video of Max crying at the fence, pressing his paw against David's hand. They explained everything. How a man who had lost everything still came back every week just to make sure his dog was safe. By morning, donations were pouring in from strangers around the country. Notes arrived with them. This broke my heart. No dog should lose his person. They deserve another chance. A week later, David walked back into the shelter, not to say goodbye, but to finally take Max home for good.